Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this very important event today as we discuss a very, very big issue in the fashion, retail, and applied industries. It's Care Labeling Act, something really important that's been around for a long time, and today we need your help. So let's get started. I'm Dr. Andrew Burnstine. I'm an entrepreneur, fashion historian, on-air media expert, and currently associate professor of fashion marketing and management at Lynn University in Boca Raton, Florida. So we're really glad to have you here today. And with me is my co-host and the person who put all this together. So we really want to thank and introduce you to John Breyault. John is the Vice President of Public Policy, Telecommunications, and Fraud. That's a long title, but really important at the National National Consumer League. Okay, and really interesting because the National Consumer League is the oldest consumer organization in the U.S. and probably, John, maybe in the world. They are 109 years old, 109.
121.
Well, 121, I'm way off. 121 years old. And the really interesting thing when John and I spoke recently, the original founder of NCL was herself at the site in, I think, 1911, when in New York, the big Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. Really important. I know we all teach it in fashion, in the history of fashion and how it changed the industry with labor laws for, obviously young people. These were young teenagers and young women who were working in this building with absolutely deplorable conditions. They were literally locked in with no breaks. And obviously that floor caught on fire, which the building then caught on fire, and most of these young women were asphyxiated and lost their life. So really interesting thing. It was really interesting to hear that the founder is really part of, or is NCL. So great history. And John will tell you a little bit about that. So it's not about me, it's about us and getting this done. So I want to turn it over to my co-host, John, with NCL, and he's going to walk us through everything, a little history, get us involved. So if you have any questions, anything like that, please let us know. And we're being recorded. So after you see this, you couldn't join us today, please get back to us with any questions, comments, concerns, and we'll get back to you. And so we can get this taken care of now. So John, take it away. Welcome and thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks, Andrew. And I really appreciate those kind words. Andrew was instrumental in helping us sort of raise awareness about this issue among your colleagues in the fashion industry. And so we really appreciate everything you're doing to help us raise awareness about the care labeling rule. So if you're not familiar with the care labeling rule, I'm going to go through a little bit of history of what the rule does and how it's evolved in the almost 50 years now that it's been in existence, why the FTC is considering repealing this rule, and then what you can do to help us fight back against this proposal. So let's take a time machine back to 1971. The Federal Trade Commission, which is the federal regulatory agency that's in charge of regulating against unfair and deceptive practices, put forward this rule. It's the care labeling rule. That's the short name of it. It's a much longer rule about proper garment care, but everybody knows it as the care labeling rule. It was first put forward in 1971, and it was designed to help consumers and the garment industry and professional cleaners understand the proper care of garments. So today, if you take your shirt, you look at the label on the back and it says dry clean only or wash with light colors, that label is there because of the care labeling rule. The rule has been amended several times since it was first put in place. In 1983, there was requirements about disclosing washing and like the dry clean only information. In 1997, They allowed the use of symbols. So if you see like an iron on there, instead of use a dry iron, that's because of that. And in 2000, also they clarified what they mean by cold, warm, and hot water when they say dry clean, or sorry, wash with warm or hot. They've had additional considerations about amending it or even repealing it starting in the early 2010s, so 2011 and 2012. And in 2014, they had a roundtable where they brought in people from around the industry to talk about what they can do. To put a little context behind this and sort of why a group like NCL and why Dr. Burnstine, excuse me, and why you were interested in this, is that consumers annually spend more than $1,800 on apparel and apparel services every year. And the average American family will wash more than 300 loads of laundry per year. So it's a substantial investment in garments every year for a family, as well as what you spend on taking care of those garments, whether we're talking laundry detergent or taking it to professional dry cleaners. And so this is obviously something that I think has a big impact on American families. So the question then becomes, why is the FTC considering getting rid of this rule, which we think has served consumers so well for more than 50 years? So the FTC has generally a process they go through where they review old regulations to determine if they're up to date, whether they need to be amended or if they need to be repealed. That's been part of their process for decades. On top of that, there's also been a government-wide directive from the Trump administration since January of 2017 that the government needs to repeal 2 regulations for every new one that they propose. And so taking all that together, the FTC is looking at this care labeling rule and has decided that what they think they want to do is actually repeal it altogether. So what are they basing that on? Well, if you look over the Federal Register notice, and unless you're a DC policy geek, I hope you never have to read the Federal Register. But that's where the commission will detail what they're planning to do and why they're planning to do it. So if you read over the Register notice, they put forward a couple of reasons why they want to repeal the rule. Number one, they say that in Canada and in the EU, care labels are not required, and that even though they're not required, garment makers and manufacturers continue to put labels on the clothing. They claim that if we harmonized our regulations with Canada and the EU, that it would be better and cheaper and provide benefits and savings to garment makers. We thought that was a fairly interesting way to go about trying to support this repeal. One thing they don't do is say, whether in Canada, for example, the Canadians' clothing have these garment labels on them specifically because they are required in the US. So most garment manufacturers will want to have sort of the same label for the US and the Canadian markets. If the US wasn't required to have them on, it's not clear whether the Canadians would still put labels on or not. The FCC also does not mention in their proposal that labels are mandated in many, even though it's not an EU directive, they are mandated in many European countries, Austria, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Finland. They're required in Australia, they're required in New Zealand. So we really don't think it's good public policy to sort of default to this lowest common denominator approach that the Canadians have, for example. The FTC also leans really heavily on comments that a representative from JCPenney made at the 2014 roundtable. There, the representative described a story where JCPenney tried to go from a word-based labeling system to a symbol-based system, and that there was substantial consumer outcry when they tried to do that. And so the commission says, well, that's just evidence that consumers want these labels and they're going to put them on voluntarily anyway. So we reject these arguments. If you look at the trends in how in fashion, particularly in sort of fashion that's marketed to the mass market, the trend has been towards getting cheaper and cheaper and looking for more ways to cut costs. So from 1987 to 2017, the percentage of discretionary spending that Americans spent on clothing declined from 5% to 2%. And the percentage of discretionary income that went to everything like entertainment, dining out, furniture, stayed flat. So flat spending on everything, but clothing went down. Why is that? That's because there was this drive to make clothes cheaper and cheaper. And so what we believe is that if the manufacturers were not required to put the labels on the clothing, they wouldn't. If it shaves off a few cents on every garment and makes that t-shirt look a little bit cheaper than the one next to it that has the label, there's a substantial market incentive for them to do that. And consumers and the cleaning industry will be the ones to pay the price. So without these labels, we think that consumers will destroy more garments inadvertently, that they'll be returning more garments to retailers when they are not cared for correctly, and that blouse or pair of pants gets ruined. The dry cleaning industry, if you look at the comments, and there have been more than 200 comments filed in this proceeding at the FTC, the dry cleaning industry says we rely on these labels so we know how to take care of these garments. And if we end up ruining something, we're on the hook for that. So if you look at the comments, for the vast majority of them are against this proposal. And so that's why we are, I mean, and for the same reasons that they are, we are too. So where does this rule currently stand? There was an official comment period that ended on September 21st. However, the FTC is still accepting comments. We know that many folks from the dry cleaning industry, for example, have been going in to speak to FTC commissioners about their concerns. Technically, the rule is still in what's called the pre-rule stage. That means the FTC is still considering all of the comments and input that they are getting on this proceeding, and they haven't decided yet whether they want to move forward on the repeal. We think it's unlikely that they will move forward before President Biden takes office on January 20th. And our hope is that by adding the voice of folks like you and other fashion industry leaders to this effort, who agree that getting rid of this rule is terrible for consumers, it's terrible for the dry cleaning industry, it's terrible for the garment industry, that they will actually listen to us and our voices and terminate this rulemaking. So what can be done about this? NCL, my group, along with Dr. Burnstine, we have drafted a sign-on letter that for concerned members of the fashion community. The letter makes the points that I've made and that Dr. Burnstine has made in urging the FTC to terminate this rulemaking. What we'd like you to do is take a look at this letter and consider adding your name and asking your colleagues in the fashion industry to do the same. In probably the first half of January, we're planning to take that letter and send it to the Federal Trade Commission. So we can add all of your voices to not only NCL's, but also the more than 200 at this point comments who have asked the FTC to terminate this rulemaking. Your name would be listed on the letter, as well as optionally your affiliation, if you're comfortable doing that. So if following this presentation, I will be circulating a copy of the letter for folks to look at and consider signing on to. And there'll be a link to a Google form where you can easily put your name and affiliation onto there. So
John, you said, excuse me, you said that there are 12 other, I think, groups or interested parties working with you. Are you allowed to tell us who some of these groups or organizations or concerned people are?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for mentioning that. So NCL filed comments opposing the rule, opposing the proposal to terminate the rule back in September. We were joined on that by, I believe it was a dozen other consumer advocacy groups from around the country. So people like Consumer Reports Magazine has signed on to support us, Consumer Federation of America, the U.S. Public Interest Research Group, state groups who are concerned about this. And we want to add your voice as folks who are leaders in the fashion industry to that effort. In doing so, not only will you be joining groups like NCL and our consumer group colleagues, but folks from the dry cleaning industry. We've had everyone from associations that represent them to little mom and pop dry cleaners who have weighed in. I just saw a comment today from Whirlpool, the manufacturer of the washing machines, who have said that there are lots of unintended consequences the FTC has not considered. So I think we have a very good chance, if all of us speak up, to actually stop this rule from moving forward, particularly given the incoming Biden administration, which we expect to be a little friendlier to hearing from consumers than the Trump administration has been.
And John, about
yeah.
Goals and outcomes. So if some people maybe there's something better than the care labels themselves. I know we floated around and some people talked about QR codes where they could be embedded into garments. People who have smart devices could take a picture of it and could be in multiple languages. It could have all kinds of information on the clothing, where it's made, sustainability effects, also about the designer, the manufacturer, all those things. Is that something that later on could be given to the FTC, or is that something they may or may not want to know about if we have a better idea to move forward with this or not?
Sure. So the FTC has in the past, and we hope will continue to consider amendments to the care labeling rule that would allow things like QR labels or sort of the other labels in other languages, for example, to be added to them. And as far as I know, there's nothing stopping manufacturers from adding those right now. They just have to also have sort of these care labeling rule label on there as defined by the regulation. The regulations can and should be updated to reflect changes in the marketplace, new technology that's available. So in the comments that NCL filed, for example, we talked about there needs to be, if wet cleaning is an option, many people believe that that's a less toxic and more environmentally friendly way to have your garments professionally maintained. But right now, wet cleaning is not an option that can be put onto the official care labels. So there's lots of proposals and ideas out there for improving them, and we think many of them are very good. Unfortunately, if the rule itself is repealed, then we think there'll be a lot of pushback from manufacturers or retailers who are just seeking to cut costs and don't want to have to pay for these labels to be on to begin with.
And John, two questions, what other parts, allied industries are affected by this? I mean, you mentioned, obviously Whirlpool with washing machines and dryers and Tide and Clorox and different bleaches and everything like that. But the idea is that what about the workers in Bangladesh and the Philippines who are through middlemen, contractors through the supply chain, or subcontractors who, getting obviously pennies a day, but they are out of a job if their task is putting those labels in another offshore and then coming over here. I mean, isn't that through the supply chain? Aren't a lot of people in different ways and means going to be losing their jobs around the world because of this to save some money? It's not just, it's really the cause and effect to it. Isn't that something that maybe you've looked into, or?
Yes, certainly. I mean, our organization has for many years worked on labor practices, particularly labor practices in the garment industry. You talked earlier about sort of that goes right back to our founding with Florence Kelly and the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. We were very much involved in the effort to highlight the abuses against workers that happened in Bangladesh with the Rama Plaza. I think was the disaster there. And certainly if this rule were not in place, there would be an effect on workers that's their job, is to make sure that those labels are put on there. And I think that they would be, there would certainly, in this drive to lower the cost of garment manufacture, important impacts on those folks. And I think, in addition to that, I talked about sort of the dry cleaning industry that would, face greater liability. There would be, there's also impacts on retailers. So there's research that shows that 83% of consumers read care labels before making a purchase decision. And when those consumers, if they did not have those labels, if they took that garment home, did not take care of it properly, chances are that they would probably try and return that to the retailers. So just by way of context, the National Retail Federation, which represents big retailers, found in 2015 that Americans returned $260 billion worth of merchandise to retailers in a single year, and that return rates for clothing were close to 40%. That's a substantial cost to retailers. And without this care labeling rule, we expect that clothing returns would go up. And so not only would there be cost to the consumers in terms of time and having to take it back, if they can get it replaced, there's also the costs to the retailers. Now, if they have a garment now that's been destroyed, that they have to take replace. So there's definitely costs there. So there are costs of repealing this rule, I think, across the fashion industry. From the very beginning with the workers who may be affected by this this drive for ever lower costs. There's the garment manufacturers themselves, those who want to do the right thing and put care labeling labels on, care labels on their garments, will be at a disadvantage if their clothes end up being more expensive because others who are less scrupulous are looking to shave costs. They're the retailers who lose out because of more returns, which will be likely when consumers fail to care for their garments adequately. The dry cleaners will face greater liability, and the consumers themselves. I talked about sort of more than $1,000 the consumers spend annually on garments, and if you ruin something and you don't take it back, that's a wasted investment. So I think there are lots of folks that the FTC has not considered that will be affected by the repeal of this rule, and that's why we think it's so important that all of these groups that I just described speak up about this.
And John, on a side note, as a domino effect, it's something that I recently thought about with this, and I think makes a lot of sense. If on a domino effect, whether it's this administration or next, or even others down the road, you have a regulation that's been in effect now for decades. It's called the Fur Products Labeling Act. I'm sure you know about it. It's similar in the sense about the labeling of furs, same kind of labeling, has to be in English. The parts of the animal needs to be listed and so forth and so on. I mean, this obviously gives us the edge of the consumer knowing what their fur is made of. If it's a part of something else, is it 100% mink or sable or raccoon or whatever. So I'm thinking as a domino effect, if the FTC, let's say, were to get away with this, what other similar acts like the Fur Products Labeling Act has been around for decades? Could that go down the tube future? You're saying, hey, we got rid of this. Let's go for this and that and the other thing. Obviously, it's going to be a lot easier for fur manufacturers not to do. They're going to save money and so forth. And people just they can look somewhere and find out what that fur coat is made of, just like they would do on a care labeling. So I know there's a similarity here, but if the dominoes fall, I'm thinking that the possibility, if this goes down the tubes, other similar labeling acts could go down the tubes as well. Is that a possibility?
Well, the FTC certainly has many rules affecting garments, including the Fur Act you talked about, that have benefits for consumers. Certainly, if they don't hear an outcry about this care labeling rule, the FTC responds to citizens who speak up. And so if we speak up about this or we don't speak up about this, then certainly I think you're right. They'll certainly be willing, they will listen to those who speak up. And so if fur manufacturers, for example, who want to sort of cut costs, start speaking up and saying that's an outdated regulation, get rid of it, then certainly there's a greater chance of that happening. So I think it's important for us to speak up in this rule and also for future rules. Let me just ask we have colleagues who have joined us for this live version. Judith or my colleague from the Fashion Forward, do you have any questions for Andrew or for me about this rule? Oh, Judith, I think you're on mute. No, you're not?
Well, you can always put it in the chat box if you.
Yeah. Sorry, put it in the chat and we'll take a look at it there.
And what about Fashion Forward? I know you have some interesting ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, my name is Sarah Baronet from Fashion Forward. It's not so much of as a question, more of a comment that you guys are coming more from the economic side. I'm coming from the sustainability and also social side. And to be honest, like I was not aware of this possible change, and this just seems absolutely devastating from the perspective that fashion is currently the second most pollutant industry in the world. So it feels quite devastating and futile, all those initiatives that we're currently working on. And also from the social side, very classist. What happens if those labels disappear from most of the consumers and they just stay relevant for luxury consumers who find it as a status symbol for sustainable labels and clothing. So for me, those are two very shocking parts, which is absolutely not questions, just reactions.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on. The people who will, I think, in the absence of this rule, right, there will be people who demand sort of, more information about their garments, and those are going to be sort of the folks who have a smartphone. I mean, just to be very basic, have a smartphone,
course, yeah.
and review and see, what is this really in this or not,
and have the time to care for it.
Yeah, and the time to care for it, exactly. The folks who I think will be hurt among, and including the consumers, are going to be the dry cleaners. I'm thinking of the sort of the mom and pop who has, not getting by on pretty slim margins even before the pandemic. And with all this going on right now, are probably just hoping to sort of keep the lights on. If they get a high dollar luxury garment that doesn't have this rule on there, and they ruin it because of that, that can be thousands of dollars that they are on the hook for to their customer. And for a small mom and pop, that could be the difference between staying in business and not. So I think what you're getting at here is all of the sort of unintended consequences of getting rid of a common sense consumer protection regulation like this. They go far beyond sort of just the economic things that I've talked about and that Andrew has talked about, although Andrew also was talking about the impact on workers in Bangladesh. I think that there are lots of sort of knock-on effects of this that we may not always consider. And I think that's why it's so important that folks like you are out there thinking about those additional impacts, because I'm just a policy geek from DC, right?
No, I think fashion tends to be considered as something, we always refer to it with Fashion Forward like the F word, because people don't take it seriously. They think it's something frivolous, but actually this is something such significant conduct to our lives. They interrelate to other areas too. So those are very, very significant areas. And it's shocking to hear that rather than for these labels to get more sophisticated, to spill more into areas of how to buy better, how to buy more consciously, how to take care of your things easier, just an option of eliminating it altogether.
I think it comes down to really, I mean, do you trust the garment industry to provide that kind of information to consumers about how to care for your garment sustainably, for example, if they're not required to?
Why would you trust them if you know that they are paying pennies for workers?
Right, exactly. And I think that's why we need this rule. And I think, adding more information on there, having a QR code, for example, added to a t-shirt to tell you where it came from, how much they were paying their workers, what kind of chemicals went into the manufacture of this garment. That's all information that I think can and should be provided on labels that consumers can use. But I think that by amending the care labeling rule, those kinds of things could be required. But getting rid of them altogether is really, it's the analogy that comes to mind is you're attacking a problem with a shotgun that you should be attacking with a scalpel to try and fix it. So I know Judith had a question about sort of, how are we trying to bring awareness to this campaign, and sort of any formal advertising on this. The question is, the answer to that is, this is the start. This is what we're trying to do, is try and build awareness about this. So if you have colleagues who you think might be interested in this, please share this video with them. I'll be circulating a link to that after this is done. Please encourage them to sign on to our letter. We would love to have as many folks as possible who want to be part of this. My email address, I'll put it in the chat. Please email me, and I'm happy to sort of have additional conversations with folks. Yeah, this is what we're doing. We're really trying to build awareness about this through word of mouth, particularly if you know reporters, for example, who you think might be interested in this, and make them aware of that. That's a big part of what we do to try and build awareness. And we're hoping that by the sort of early middle of January, we'll have a critical mass of folks sign on to this letter, that we can file something that has a lot of impact. And certainly when we do that, it doesn't just go into a government database somewhere that only bureaucrats are going to look at. We typically announce these via press releases and things like that. So definitely please let folks know about this.
John, I think also there's a fact sheet that we have too, that we can get out to could be very helpful. Some of the things that you talked about in the industry. So we can get that fact sheet out along with the letter to sign off on. So I think that will be interesting to people as well as they look onto this. And one thing that I thought was interesting when you were talking about all this is also with the stores and the retailers who will certainly are for this. I'm thinking about when you go into a store, and whether it's a lady's dress or a man's shirt or tie or anything, and you look at it, let's say it doesn't have a label. So then I go to the sales associate and say, hi, can you tell me how to take care of this? And many times, if they don't have that customer service and that, we call it product knowledge, and how can they for thousands of pieces that they're selling on their floor? So they're not going to know, and they might say, well, I'll try to look it up, or I'm busy, or go to customer service. So they're going to be really affected. You think, again, with the pandemic, what's going on, trying to get somebody even to wait on you, but asking people questions about knowing about an article of clothing and how to maintain it and take care of it, it's just going to be, it's impossible. So, and again, who are they going to blame? The retailer. They're going to write a letter to management, possibly not go back there, maybe contact the designer or manufacturer about it. So all of that bad publicity is just going to trickle down, when it can be averted just by keeping this the way it is. As we talked about before, maybe there are ways to make it better for the 21st century. Yes, granted, but I think we need to keep it the way it is now, and then possibly expand on that later on, again, with perhaps a new administration, with a new FTC director, whoever that will be, and their team. We don't know. Hopefully they will be encouraged to hear this and sit down and negotiate and work this out. So I think we need to go back, keep it the way it is, it's my opinion, and then work and advance that. But we have to start somewhere, as you say today, get everybody on board, sign off on it, make sure we're heard, and go from there. And I think, as again, without the consumer, without the pocketbook, without paying for this, everybody's going to be affected. So I think that's the way we go. And as I always tell my students, we're in this together. So I think that's our charging motto. As I put it on the email on LinkedIn, It's a time to care.
Yes. Well, I think that's a perfect place to bring this conversation to a close, and I think a perfect call to action to folks to be part of this. So again, I just want to thank you, Sarah, you, Judith, for being here in our live event today. Please share this widely. We'll be putting this up on NCL's YouTube page. Thank you especially to you, Andrew, for helping us publicize this effort. And fingers crossed, this is the start of an effort that'll really benefit not just consumers, but the entire industry.
And John, we want to thank the NCL and certainly you for your charge on this and getting us and as a liaison. So again, if anybody has any questions, John's email address, telephone number is there for you. He's incredible. I think he works 24/7, doesn't even at this time. He's being demanded to take a vacation, so have a great time wherever you go and whatever you do. But to all my colleagues, fashion students, entrepreneurs, textile industry, fashion forward, even people who just love clothes, love to shop, to mom and pop dry cleaners and all those workers around the world who would be affected, and to the FTC and the federal government. We are going to work on this. We're going to get this going, get this together, and this will be our charging call and our motto for 2021 to really make sure that we have a proper care label, and it continues, gets better, but where everybody can obviously see the instructions, the directions, and feel confident what they're buying, how to take care of it. And certainly for good fashion, you want to make sure it's taken care of, and even fast fashion. So I want to thank everybody on behalf of John, the NCL, and all of you here today. And those of you who will be listening to this broadcast, please get involved, sign up. If you have any questions, please let us know. But we must take action to make action. So it's really important. So we want to thank you. Happy holidays to all. And again, any questions, please let us know. Stay safe, stay well, and we hope to really be working on this and see a great outcome in 2021, John. And thanks to you, and thanks to NCL for helping us get this going. So I want to thank everybody.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Stay safe, everybody. And again, please get in touch with us. We have to get this going. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day and take care.
Bye.